Good evening, this is Jan John. I don't know if you have been following the news, but yesterday was the 800th anniversary of the Magna Carta. 800 years ago, King John, the then King of England, signed a constitution giving rights to many people. Before this, the power had lain almost entirely in the hands of the king, and many people see the Magna Carta as one of the first democratic constitutions. A constitution is a declaration of the rights of people, and its purpose is to try and give fairness and justice to everyone. You are going to hear a news clip from the BBC, which will last about 8 minutes, during which several people will be talking. They will be discussing different points about the Magna Carta and its relevance today. You may find some of this difficult, as they may speak quickly and sometimes unclearly, but don't worry, I will summarize the main points later and in addition go into these areas in more detail. So now listen to the news clip from the BBC. As I said, this is about 8 minutes. Then I'm going to continue talking.
Music to celebrate the marking of a major anniversary, the 800th anniversary of Magna Carta. That seminal document was written on June the 15th, 1215. Since then, its principles have been enshrined in laws and constitutions around the world. In Britain, events are just finishing to celebrate the Great Charter, which, according to many, introduced some of the key rights enjoyed in modern democracies, and, according to many, form the basis of quite a few modern constitutions around the world. Here's the Indian High Commissioner to the UK, Ranjan Mathai, speaking today at the ceremony down in Runnymede, the sleepy riverside meadow west of London, where the document was drawn up.
I think it's the foundation of rule of law, and India is a nation ruled by law. And I think that is the basis of the Indian Constitution. The Indian Constitution also derives many of its principles in terms of the freedoms from the democratic traditions of Britain and the United States, and certainly these date back to the Magna Carta.
But just what would the world look like had it not come into existence? Would Western democracies still be enjoying their liberal freedoms if England's much maligned King John hadn't met with rebels to sign what was essentially a hastily cobbled together peace deal? I've been discussing the Magna Carta with Conor Gearty, Professor of Human Rights Law in the Law Department of the London School of Economics, and also Dr. Peter Jones, who helped to found the two classical charities, Friends of Classics and Classics for All. He writes a weekly ancient and modern column in The Spectator magazine. Just how influential was Magna Carta?
Well, you've just heard this Indian gentleman telling us how enormously influential it was. There's no question about that. Question is it as novel as everyone says? And the answer to that is no, it isn't, because the Greeks and Romans had got there 1,000, 1,500 years before. There's nothing novel about the Magna Carta at all. It's just a great shame that Greeks and Romans, the Roman Empire in the West collapsed in the 5th century AD, because then we might have got there much earlier. And the Greek culture, of course, was never one that was going to be spread across Europe anyway. But they got there 1,000, 1,500 years before Magna Carta.
So, Professor Conor Gearty, not novel but significant. What's your view?
Yeah, well, I'm with Peter. Certainly not novel. There were even a whole bunch of what we'd now call constitutions in Anglo-Saxon England before Magna Carta, so it's not even novel in its own terms. And certainly the things we value about today, for example, democracy, habeas corpus and so on, they were all fought for and achieved quite independently of Magna Carta. So it's only in the most abstract sense that one describes it as something which stands for anything. The High Commissioner refers to the rule of law, that's true, but there even, single bit that mattered, enforcement, was removed by 1216. So it's sort of vacuous, but well liked by those in power, which should cause us all, I think, a degree of suspicion.
Peter Jones, tell us a little bit more about the Roman and the Greek, the legacies of that, and how that might have fed into what we now take for granted under Magna Carta.
Indeed, well, the Athenians established a democratic principle that law should be made by private citizens, the demos, under the principles of equality of speech and equality before the law. Trial by jury was the way it was all done. A randomly selected jury. There was a complex process of arbitration before things went to the jury. You could have a private arbitration to start with. If that didn't settle the problem, a public arbitrator was brought in. If that didn't settle the problem, then you went to the court of law. But you could go back to a process of arbitration at any time you liked. You know, that's very much reflects the sort of system we have today. Now, we've developed that without the influence of the Greeks, but the Greeks had got there 2,000 years ago. As for the Romans, Marcus Tullius Cicero was perhaps the most outstanding figure here. He was the person who gives serious attention to the idea of natural and thus a universal basis, natural law, and thus the universal basis of justice and right. And Cicero was used extensively by thinkers like Locke and Hume, and most of all, most significantly, of course, by the American founding fathers, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, James Wilson. They all refer to Cicero and his principles of nature and eternal reason, the idea of the law of nations and these sorts of things.
Professor Gearty, if we look at Magna Carta in terms of it being totemic, in the context of the global impact, it is arguable, isn't it, that it hasn't had the kind of global success that perhaps we would like. There are many places in the world where just the basic rule of law does not exist.
Yeah, possibly one could argue the United Kingdom, where legal aid cutbacks are making it almost impossible to access justice. So it depends how we imagine ourselves to be. And Magna Carta is popular because it feeds an imagination of ourselves as a place where democracy, the rule of law, separation of powers and so on exist. And there's no doubt at the level of the technically legal, these have definitely grown, become global and so on and so forth. More countries since the end of the Cold War subscribe to what they call democratic principles and the rule of law. It's become the latest guarantor of integrity and so on. But inequality grows, corruption is rife. So there is a mismatch between what Magna Carta tells us and what the law tells us we are and what we are in fact. And it's that, I think, that leads the Prime Minister to feel able to say, for example, that the spirit of Magna Carta demands that we repeal the Human Rights Act, non sequitur if ever I heard one.
So what you're saying is that even in countries that are embracing the mythology surrounding Magna Carta, there are real difficulties.
Well, if I planned to plunder my country for the interests of my family and myself, I would certainly immediately subscribe to Magna Carta and have a fantastic celebration of it as cover for my near doing.
But Peter Jones.
Yes, very good. I'm reminded of a wonderful quotation by the brilliant Roman historian Tacitus, who said the more laws came into being, the more corrupt the state became.
Excellent.
There's a terrible truth to that. And of course, when one looks at Greek and Roman practices, there was lots of shady dealing going on there. Just because they're laws, it doesn't mean to say that people follow them.
Okay.
But nevertheless, the principle of law is of enormous importance.
Agreed on that one.
Academics in harmonious agreement. Dr. Peter Jones and Professor Conor Gearty. Let's play out now with a little more of the London Philharmonic Orchestra from Runnymede earlier today, playing a newly composed anthem for the occasion of the 800th anniversary of Magna Carta, written by British composer John Rutter. I'll be back again tomorrow. I hope you'll join me. Thanks for your company today.
Thank you to the BBC for that news clip. and also to the guest speakers. Let me try to summarize some of the main points made in the discussions. First of all, they said that the principles from the Magna Carta are enshrined in democracies and constitutions around the world. Constitutions. This means that democracies in contemporary times have many of the principles which we first saw in the Magna Carta 800 years ago. The Magna Carta introduced many key rights which we can now see in modern democracies. Key rights. You will have heard the Indian High Commissioner say that the Magna Carta was a foundation for the rule of law. This means that society is ruled by law rather than, for example, only powerful people. The presenter said that King John hastily cobbled together, Hastily, and COBBLED, hastily cobbled together a peace deal with the rebels. At that time, without going into too much history, King John had some conflict with powerful people in the country, and to preserve his monarchy he had to compromise and put together a peace deal. They also talked about whether this was the first constitution, and the professor from the LSE pointed out that no, it wasn't. Both the ancient Greeks and Romans had some kind of constitution 1000 to 1500 years before the Magna Carta. They also talked briefly about whether the Magna Carta was the beginning of a truly democratic society, and one of the guest professors seemed to be quite cynical about that. Cynical, CYNICAL. For example, he said that if you are in a position of power and wealthy, it would probably be in your interests to support the Magna Carta for, amongst other reasons, the fact that it may help you to cover up your crimes. He said that just because there are laws doesn't mean that people are going to follow them, and also quoted the Roman historian Tacitus, Tacitus, who said, the more laws that come into being, the more corrupt the state will be, suggesting therefore that laws may in fact achieve the opposite effect. They may not cause society to become more honest, they may in fact cause it to become more dishonest. I'm going to discuss this area in more detail later, but I am going to stop this recording here and continue in my next recording. Bye bye.